Hey everyone, history buffs and military enthusiasts. Before you dive into this story, do me a solid. Subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. You're about to embark on a wild ride into the past, full of intrigue, iron giants, and military secrets. We're talking about killer machines, engineering genius, and why the most fearsome weapons of war sometimes just vanish. This isn't just a bunch of dry facts. It's a real-life drama that played out on the battlefield and in quiet government offices. Stick with me, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's unravel this mystery together. Rise and fall, why the tank hunters disappeared. Picture a battlefield, the roar of cannons, the whistle of bullets, the grind of engines. And in the middle of this hell, steel predators whose only purpose is to kill other steel giants. They aren't charging headlong. They aren't storming trenches. They lie in wait, camouflaged, their long barrels, like a scorpion's sting, aimed at the enemy's weakest armor. These are tank destroyers, the kings of World War II, the most numerous self-propelled guns in history. But what happened? Why do we barely see these specialized hunters in modern armies? Where do they go? The answer isn't just a technical footnote. It's a detective story full of strategic mistakes, economic realities, and the ruthless evolution of warfare. If World War I was the cradle where the tank was born and took its first wobbly steps, then World War II was its glory days, its absolute peak. The sheer number of tanks produced in those years will likely never be matched. But an equally important hero of that war was the self-propelled gun, or SPG. Figuratively speaking, the first SPGs, even on wheels, appeared almost as early as tanks themselves. But they found their true fame and mass use between 1939 and 1945. The interwar years were a strange, quiet period for SPGs, a lull before the storm. Suddenly, in late 1939, every warring nation realized, without mobile, well-armored artillery that could keep up with tank spearheads, victory was impossible. The Germans realized it first, and they started mass-producing guns on chassis. Then, stumbling and learning the hard way, everyone else joined this arms race. And this is where the golden age of a specific type of SPG began, the tank destroyer. The first experiments happened back in the late 1920s, but for a long time, they were just quirky engineering exercises, not a priority for the generals. The war changed everything. Tank destroyers became the most common type of SPG, and the fiercer the fighting got, the more rolled off the assembly lines. It seemed like this was the new god of war. With such a meteoric rise, especially in the final stages of the war, these machines had a brilliant future ahead. But history had other plans. No, it didn't vanish completely. Gun-armed tank destroyers were produced in the 1950s, and even today, the Russian army has this Sprut SD, which can loosely be called a classic tank destroyer. But almost immediately after the victory salvos, the development of new tank destroyers either ground to a halt or became a tiny, barely trickling stream. Why? What broke the back of these steel predators? Let's figure it out. And this won't be just a history lesson, but a real analysis full of unexpected twists. Different roads to the same goal, how the hunters were born. The first act of our drama is a story of search. The search for the perfect formula for a killer machine. And here, every major power went its own way, stepping on rakes and making discoveries. The German path, from primitive to a nightmarish menagerie. The Germans, as the main instigators of the World War, were the first to think about a specialized tank destroyer. And you know how they started? Imagine a regular Hanomag agricultural tractor with a 37mm anti-tank gun mounted on it. Yes, the first German tank destroyer was just that, clumsy, vulnerable, and almost comical. Thankfully for German crews, it never went beyond a prototype. But then things got serious. The Rheinmetall-like tractor Selbstfahrerfett appeared. This was a different beast, more like a tank with a rotating turret. And this was no accident. German military brass initially wanted a turreted tank destroyer, fast, mobile, a match for any tank. They experimented with half-track chassis, also with turrets. The Americans had similar ideas. But as often happens, war got in the way. There was no time for lengthy development. They needed something fast, cheap, and in large numbers. And the Germans found their recipe. Brilliant in its simplicity and cynicism. Take the chassis of an obsolete tank and put a bigger gun on it. This is how the first mass-produced Hunter was born, the Panzerjäger I tank Hunter I. They took the chassis of the light Panzer I tank, which by 1939 was already helpless against new enemy armor, and mounted a captured Czech 47mm gun. The result was a mobile, self-propelled carriage that could quickly change position and hit the enemy. This approach became Germany's signature for several years. When Soviet T-34 and KV tanks appeared on the battlefield, light German anti-tank guns became useless. They needed bigger guns. The problem was the new guns were incredibly heavy. If a 37mm gun could be pushed across a field by one soldier, its successor, the 50mm PaK-38, weighed over 800 kilograms, and the legendary 75mm PaK-40, almost 1.5 tons. Dragging this beast with an 8-man crew under fire was suicide. This is where obsolete light tank chassis came in handy. This gave birth to a whole line of machines with a fearsome name, Marder, Martin, light, tall, with a powerful gun. They were vulnerable, but effective. The peak of this philosophy was the Nashorn Rhinoceros, on a special chassis, with a monstrous 88mm PaK-43 gun that weighed almost 5 tons and was a burden without a self-propelled chassis. At the same time, another process was underway. Ordinary assault guns, like the Stu G3, got longer guns and effectively turned into tank destroyers. And then there were the accidental machines, like the Ferdinand, born because Ferdinand Porsche's Tiger P tank was rejected, and they had to do something with the 90 already finished chassis. Thus, one of the most famous and flawed heavy tank destroyers was created. By 1943, after the Battle of Kursk, the Germans learned their lesson. Marders and Nashorns, being essentially guns on platforms, often died in attacks where they were misused. A new concept was needed, and it was born: a low, well-armored machine without a turret, with a powerful gun built directly into the front of a fixed casemate. This philosophy was embodied in the Jagdpanzer IV, the Jagdpanther, and the small but deadly Hetzer, Jagdpanzer 38. This was the evolutionary peak of the German Hunter, the Soviet path from improvisation to standardization. In the Red Army, things developed with their own quirks. The first attempts were similar to the Germans. The famous S-30 was a powerful gun mounted on the chassis of a Komsomolets artillery tractor. Simple as pie, but with the same flaws: high profile, poor crew protection. But the main Soviet path was standardization and simplicity. Soviet designers, like genius mechanics in a parts shortage, managed to build incredibly effective machines from a limited set of components. Their evolution started from the assault gun, the Su-122. When Tigers and Panthers appeared in 1943, a quick answer was needed. It became the Su-85, the same Su-122, but with a new, long-barreled gun. Officially, it wasn't called a destroyer, but everyone knew its main target was German armor. The peak of the Soviet medium hunter was the Su-100. On the same reliable T-34 chassis, they installed a new 100mm D-10S gun, capable of taking out a Panther from over 1,500 meters away. It was a fearsome, mass-produced, and highly successful machine. For dealing with heavy tanks, there were giants on the IS chassis, the ISU-122 and the ISU-152. Their power was devastating. But here, too, there were problems. Attempts to create something more powerful than the Su-100 ran into the limits of the chassis. The Su-122P project with a long gun from the IS tank failed. The vehicle was overloaded, the barrel was too long, and ammunition capacity was low. The attempt to create the Su-101 with a rear-mounted fighting compartment to relieve stress on the front wheels also failed. The machine overheated and was cramped. The T-34 chassis had reached its limit. The American path, speed as armor. The Americans took the most unexpected path. They returned to an idea others had abandoned, the turreted tank destroyer. Their philosophy was simple: speed is our armor. Why carry dozens of tons of metal if you could be swift as the wind, striking from ambushes? This gave us the M10 Wolverine and its upgrade, the M36 Jackson, with a 90mm gun. But the ultimate embodiment of this idea was the M18 Hellcat. This was essentially a race car on tracks. Its armor protected against maybe bullets and shrapnel, but it was the fastest SPG of World War II. The idea was to pop out, fire a shot, and immediately scoot to a new position. It was a beautiful, even elegant concept, but in practice, it was more complicated. A machine gun burst could disable its crew or its running gear. War is not a racetrack where everything is predictable. The peak and the precipice. Why 1944 was the beginning of the end. 1944 was the star hour for tank destroyers. It seemed they had reached peak perfection. For the Germans, the Jagdpanther, Hetzer, Panzer IV/70. For the Soviets, the Su-100 and ISU-122. For the Americans, the M36 and M18. Even the British, always skeptical of turretless SPGs, put their Archer into production. But it was at this moment, at the peak of their glory, that the tank destroyer concept began to crack. Those warning bells started ringing, foretelling the end. Problem number one, the exhausted chassis. All these magnificent machines were add-ons on top of tank chassis, and chassis have a strength limit. The German Jagdpanther and Panzer IV/70 suffered from a monstrous overload on the front road wheels, leading to rapid wear and breakdowns. The Soviet Su-100 also initially ate its road wheels. Installing more powerful guns was now impossible. The chassis would simply fall apart. Designers had hit a physical ceiling. Problem number two, the endless shell versus armor duel. Tank armor kept getting thicker. To punch through it, you needed ever more powerful and, consequently, heavier guns. It was a vicious circle leading to a dead end. For a tank destroyer to remain effective, it had to constantly grow in size and weight, approaching a regular tank. Problem number three, strategy and economics. Let's look at this from a general's and a finance minister's perspective. What's more cost-effective to produce in a total war? A tank, a universal machine. It can support infantry, spearhead a breakthrough, and fight enemy tanks. A tank destroyer, a highly specialized machine, perfect for defense and ambushes, but helpless on the offensive without support. The answer is obvious. The economy of victory demanded standardization. It was simpler and cheaper to build a mass-produced, balanced tank than two different types of vehicles. The U.S. understood this early. By the start of 1946, their military council had ruled, the best tank destroyer is a tank. Development of new SPGs in this class was shut down. In the USSR, they came to the same conclusion after the war. Why build a new generation Su-100 when you have the universal T-54, which is a formidable force in itself and can perform the same functions? Experimental work continued, but after Stalin's death, tank destroyers weren't built serially for decades. The Cold War reality, economics, and the assembly line of standardization. Let's step away from the battlefield for a minute and look into the offices of planners and economists. The Cold War wasn't just an arms race. It was an economic race. The USSR and the USA were preparing for a global conflict that would require millions of units of equipment. A logistics nightmare. Maintaining two different vehicle fleets, tanks and tank destroyers, on the same chassis in an army is a quartermaster's hell. Double the spare parts, different crew training programs, complexities with field repairs, standardization around the main battle tank, and BT solve these problems at a stroke. Economies of scale. An assembly line stamping out thousands of identical T-54s or M48 patents was far more efficient and cheaper than producing two different models in smaller quantities. The price of one universal vehicle was lower than the combined price of a specialized tank and a specialized tank destroyer. Changing doctrine. Nuclear war blurred the lines between front and rear. They needed machines capable of operating independently, without support. A narrow specialist hunter wasn't suitable for this. They needed a universal soldier, which is what the main battle tank became. Rebirth in a new guise. The missile takes over. But the history of tank destroyers didn't end there. It just took a pause and was reborn in a completely new form. The era of the big gun for hunters was over. It was replaced by the missile. In the 1960s and 70s, ADGM's anti-tank guided missiles appeared. And crucially, they could be mounted on light, cheap chassis, on jeeps, armored personnel carriers, and later on dedicated vehicles. The Soviet Shermes, the Western Jaguars. These were the new hunters. Their philosophy changed completely. They didn't need heavy armor. Their strength was in range and precision. They could hit a target from 2 to 3 miles away, remaining invisible. This was no longer a duel at 1 kilometer, like in the days of the Jag Panther and Su-100, but a sophisticated ambush hunt. But here, too, they faced a crisis. Modern tanks acquired reactive armor, active protection systems that intercept incoming missiles. The balance was upset again. Today, the battlefield once again belongs to universal main battle tanks, supported by drones and artillery. The specialized tank destroyer, in its classic sense, has once again faded into the background. History lessons that still matter today. So, where did the tank hunters go? They didn't go anywhere. They dissolved into history, yielding to more flexible and economically viable solutions. Their rise and fall is a lesson that in war, as in life, it's not the strongest or most specialized that survives, but the most adaptable. They were a product of their era, an era of total war, where you needed a quick and cheap fix for a hole in your anti-tank defense. They did their job and left. But looking at modern battlefields, where drones stalk and destroy tanks, doesn't it seem like the spirit of the hunter is still alive? It just traded steel armor for silicon chips and a long gun for a satellite link. History repeats itself. And who knows, maybe in the future, we will see the birth of a new, even deadlier type of combat vehicle that will prey on armored legions from a safe distance. War is a perpetual engine of evolution. Well, that wraps up our investigation. This story is a reminder that nothing lasts forever, not even the most fearsome machines. So what do you think? Do you agree that economics and standardization killed the tank destroyer class? Or do you believe in their rebirth in the age of robots and artificial intelligence? I'm waiting for your thoughts, debates, and comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and smash that like button if you found this interesting. Your engagement is the signal that we're on the right track and need to prepare new, equally deep and intriguing material. Until next time in the world of military history.